I'm so excited to talk to you again. So thank you for being back on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this. I was thinking back, and I think that the last time we chatted was actually right after you had your show Furlough at Zerker Gallery in New York. So how have you been since then? It's been like a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been a while, and yeah, we've been sliding out of the global pandemic and and all that. And I let's see, I think I had moved to upstate New York to Ithaca in 2019, so not too long before we talked. So I've had time to really settle in. My family, my wife and I, we bought a house, and so now we are like a little more permanent here. And I think my studio was in my home at the time. So it was really in that kind of post-pandemic slide where I was making whole shows in a 70 square foot bedroom. Since then, I moved out to it's Ithaca. So if you kind of can meet somebody, there's so much commercial real estate that's not rented. They'll just be happy to have someone in there for a brief period that kind of until they can rent it to someone who wants to pay full commercial rent. So I've moved studios a couple times, but I've rented whole buildings for I won't even tell people how much they cost because friends that live in New York are they're just so depressed when I tell them that you can find a building. It's very hard to do, but I've lucked out. So I've got very big studios and that's been awesome. And I'm working with some new galleries that are great. I had just started working with Mother's Tankstation the last time we talked, and that's just been amazing. Just the most thoughtful people to work with. And then last year I started working with François Ghebaly Gallery, and that's been super exciting and fun. So yeah, lots and lots has changed.
Amazing. I love hearing all of that. And it blows my mind that you're creating whole shows in 70 square feet of a studio space. Bravo.
Yeah, it wasn't the first time. I mean, I used to live in New York, so I had, it's just like I guess the other bedroom will be my studio.
And so now you have more space. It sounds like you've really settled into Ithaca. Do you feel like having more space for your work has impacted your practice at all?
Yeah, it's had a big effect. I used to work primarily on one painting at a time, or sometimes no more than say three. They just would get stacked too deep against the wall, and I'd lose track of them, and I'd kind of lose momentum. So now I have space to spread things out. I did sometimes it sprawls a bit because last year I started counting and I realized I had something like 30 plus unfinished paintings. So I wasn't allowed to start I made a rule that I wasn't allowed to start anything else until I finished a few things. But yeah, I might have 15, 20 paintings going at a time, which is really nice. And it's kind of changed the metabolism of the studio so that things can sustain much longer. I'm in the process of finishing a painting right now that I started, and that it would have been not long after we talked last. It's maybe a 4-year, 3-year painting that I'm finally finishing. But I normally would have been, I would have slashed it if it had to sit for a year. But yeah, so it's really changed.
It was taking up too much real estate, right? At that point, it's like, sorry, no room, gotta go. But
Yeah,
now that's
absolutely. You'd have to either succeed or fail pretty immediately. And so it's allowed me to be a little more generous with myself, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things that I'm curious about. The first was about rules, and the second one was finishing a painting that had like sat around for 3 to 4 years. So I'll start with the rules. I was just having this conversation with some residents at Chautauqua who felt like they really weren't sure how to bring rules into their practice in order to let them thrive. And I would just love to hear from you your thoughts on creating boundaries or creating rules for yourself as an artist.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Well, one rule that I had for a long time was that I don't work from photographs in any kind of direct way. So if any composition, the characters that are in my paintings are coming about through drawing, different kinds of drawings serve different purposes. Some help me find a composition, or a space, some help me figure out who the person is that is appearing in the work. And that rule has really served me. I kind of put it in place around 2008 or 2009, and then it's just gradually softened a little bit. For a while, anytime I wanted to put information in that was too particular to invent, I would look up images and then draw them, or I'd collect images, go out and photograph things. And I would always do a drawing, and then then I could paint from the drawing. And at a certain point, I was nervous that if I had a photograph, it would somehow provide too much of maybe not the right kind of information, and the paintings would appear collaged. It would be disparate, between the things that I had invented and the things that I had right in front of me or had a photo of. And gradually I've been able to soften that, because I feel like I've gotten more comfortable with my own hand, and I think I trust myself a little bit more than I did at one point. So I still don't have photos of any of the spaces or the people or anything like that, but if there's a logo or something that I want to have specifically in there, I won't go to the trouble to draw it like a Xerox machine, like a very rudimentary Xerox machine, and then look at that. It's okay, I'll let myself look at a photo, but I don't look too close. I kind of like the photo is almost over, across the room, and I just get a little bit of what I want, or I have it on my phone and the screen goes to sleep. So I just have like the after image of, the logo on some hat, and that's enough for me. But yeah, that's an example of where some of those rules have come about. That was a very conscious decision, because of the way that photography was creating such an indirect process for me. But other rules have come about through just the painting process. The sort of geometries that my work has and the light that it has often comes from a call and response with the painting. And I feel that those are fundamental now, but they came about after, in the midst of a painting process. They weren't something where I said, oh, I'm going to put an interesting shape here. It was more like there was some problem with the painting that could only be solved through these means. Something had to be disrupted, reconfigured, or held together, armatured with some structure that I had to create through paint. So that's a different, if we're talking about rules, a different legislative system, to arrive at them.
Do you ever, or have you ever put on like constraints, like I'm only going to work on this size of a painting for right now, and I'm going to do 5 of them, or I'm only going to be working in this color palette? Is that anything that you've ever put on yourself when you were younger, or maybe even now if you're working towards a show and want to be holding it together?
I have, sometimes the size constraint is very helpful. I used to oil paint, and I quit it. I kicked the habit, and
You can't kick the habit of oil painting. I love that.
yeah, after that, I just made drawings for 18 months to 2 years, and I wanted the drawings to be substantial enough that they felt like a real investment. So the smallest size I would work was 22 by 30, which is sort of the full sheet of nice paper when you ordered it. I did work bigger than that, but that became like the standard size, the way that somebody might have a notebook that's a certain size that they like to write in. So that felt necessary. And then after you fill a box or a portfolio with those, and a show seems quite natural, like you're saying, because they're the same size. In terms of color, I won't do that necessarily, but I have such color habits and preferences that they just, in a way, I almost have to do the opposite, disrupt my tendency to make, paintings of a certain color. There's a certain, kind of pinkish color that I gravitate toward, or a kind of nocturnal green, phthalo green kind of light. So sometimes I have to not do that. Find ways to make new messes that surprise, create surprise colors.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I really like thinking about it that way too, what you're saying, like recognizing certain habits that we might fall into and then disrupting that. How do we push back against it so that we can continually invent and create more than what we've been doing previously, and just kind of, going through it over and over. Um, I wanted to go to that, what you said about that painting that you worked on for 3 to 4 years. Now, does that mean that you just like put it away and then pulled it back after 3 years, or did you kind of continuously kind of pick at it over 3 or 4 years?
There were picky times, and then there were storage times. It used to be there was a very narrow hallway on the way to the bathroom in the studio I was in, and it was just leaning against the wall there for a long time. So I looked at it every day as I went by, and every once in a while I would come in. Very infrequently, I would think, "Oh, okay, I want to knock this arm down that was extended out to the left." So I might have come and knifed some color over it just as a notation. But that one was unusual. It really sat for a long time, and the sitting, it got to a point where I felt completely equally comfortable slashing it or trying to resuscitate it. And I think there was a kind of freedom that came from just not caring so much. So there were 4 figures before, and I took one out, and one of the figures that remained had been standing and was almost walking in a kind of balance beam, one foot in front of the other sort of way. And now she's sitting on a bicycle. So it was totally different. But 2 of the figures remain the same, and the color palette remained the same. And there's a way in which the paintings are a little like animations that way. You kind of live with them, and someone can get up and move around if they need to. And I try not to feel too attached to those things. I usually don't. And oftentimes, if I do feel really attached to some portion of a painting, it kind of has to go, because everything else, it becomes such heavy ballast that it really drags down the rest of the picture. And as soon as I just cover it over or take it away, suddenly everything lightens up. You can breathe and make decisions again.
I love hearing that. You mentioned animations, and I know there was a time where you were kind of making you were making film and you were recording sound and whatnot. Is that still part of your practice right now, or is that something you're not currently working on?
It is a big part of what I'm doing. I just finished something that I hope I'm hoping to have in my show in LA next year. But it took 5 years to finish. So I think I hadn't finished something since we last talked. But it's just because animation can be so slow. This particular project, I had come up with such an involved structure that it amounts to something like 110 minutes of footage. But when you see it, it looks like a short. But every time it loops in the gallery, it's a little bit different, because I made a whole bunch of shorts that are very similar to one another with subtle variations. So it just took a very long time to do, but I'm really excited about it. I was working with actors actually hired actors for the first time. I was animating to dialogue, which was new to me. But all animated with paint, just by me, by hand, not a digital process at all. So I'm thrilled about that, and I'm already on to the next project. I've painted a little more than 70 small paintings that I'm starting to animate. So there'll be some new stuff coming out soon. Don't worry.
It like blows my mind. Yeah, I remember, because I think of this often, actually, how you were saying you were walking around with your daughter recording the sounds like outside your home. And like, Matt, I actually think of this often. I just thought of it this summer because I was like walking and I was listening to the water, and that popped into my head. And I just think there's something so powerful in capturing a moment that is personal and yours, and then it becomes part of something bigger, which I guess is what we do a lot as artists. But it just feels so, I don't know, just the idea of that sound being there is just beautiful. So yeah, I can't wait to see all of this stuff.
I'm excited. Yeah, she voiced a couple of characters in the animation. There are a few kids that briefly appear. One is with their mom on the bus, and is just asking questions about the names of streets, and then there's another who's begging for candy at the counter of a CVS. But I could just I could manipulate the pitch of her voice in post, so it's like somebody else.
I love that. That is awesome. I can't, like I said, I can't wait to see it. I'm gonna have to check it out. And
She's very
so,
proud of it.
oh, I bet she is. Does she go to your openings and everything with you then? And it was like,
She does, yeah. I had the show that I had open last year in New York. She was like the star. It was amazing. She had a whole team. Everybody, a lot of people brought their kids, and so she was outside the gallery on the. It was April, and so it was nice outside, and she was out on the sidewalk holding court, dancing, and really the center of things.
oh, I love that. I love that. So you also just closed a recent show in London with Mother's Tank Station Limited, and it was titled Halftime. Can you tell us a little bit about that exhibition?
Yeah, it's a show that centers on a painting that's also called Halftime, with a slight difference in spacing and punctuation, as I wanted to distinguish between the middle of a football game, which is what the painting is of. It's a locker room scene with high school football, Kansas City, or Midwestern high school football is where I imagine it. Not Kansas City, but the little town I like to think that I set everything in the Ozarks in Missouri. But I was also thinking about a kind of liminal space, a kind of middle space, a feeling of being between where you came from and where you want to be for a lot of the characters, as well as a sense of almost a musical idea of halftime, like split tempo, like down tempo, which is kind of in keeping with the mood of the work that I make, which often has a kind of melancholic look to it. The other another notable thing about the show is the way that basically everybody in every character in every painting in the show is looking at you, makes kind of direct eye contact. So you kind of walk in, and it's there's an almost uncomfortable feeling of connection. So there's something in that show that deals with that sense of, I think when a painting looks at you, there's a feeling of presence, and I think finding that kind of that tension in the presence is something I'm after.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the piece Halftime right now, and I've been looking at this show and thinking a bit about your past shows and different pieces. And I just now noticed the lion and the clock in the corner.
Yeah.
I didn't see that at first, again, because there's that intense stare. So I'm coming into it with that. And then that kind of leads me down to this other stare. And then the light is always incredible in your work and pushes me around the painting. And so I love that the lion's actually pretty, in some ways, it's an assertive move. This drawing within a drawing, it's large, it's kind of seemingly the same like tone. But because it's off to the side right there, it doesn't like jump out of the painting at me, like it's a slow read, which I really like. Yeah, that was something I was noticing between the exhibition Furlough, when we had last spoken, and this is that there's these same silent moments. Like everything always feels silent to me, which is funny because we're talking about recording sound in your other pieces, but like there are these like moments where there's like a pause. And I felt like in Furlough, and for probably good reason, there was more of a sadness in that. Whereas in this, it's a little bit more like assertiveness that's happening in some ways, maybe because of the eye, the looking out at the viewer. And even in one that I was looking at, Army Knife, she actually seems like very almost like just like hanging out, having a good time. You know what I mean? Was that something you were thinking about?
Well, I think having a greater breadth in the mood is something I've been seeking. It starts to almost be if everything were the same mood, it starts to be like a restrictive musical genre. It's and I'm not interested in that. I want the characters to have to some degree, their own autonomy, so that they can kind of speak back to me about how they feel. So the woman in Army Knife, I feel like, is she's almost a little menacing. She's like, I mean, she's playing around with this knife blade. She probably just used it to cut the melon that she, is on the picnic table. But yeah, there's a vague sense of threat or like power to her because of that. And I feel differently, but a similar kind of assertiveness about the two women with the baby in Better Half. That they're kind of looking out at you from their own space. They don't need me particularly. They seem like they've got it figured out. And so I like that there's that kind of like some of the sadness in the earlier work seemed right at that moment. But I think that these characters have, I guess, a greater degree of self-assertion in some cases.
Mhm. You mentioned where you were kind of picturing the characters in your paintings, Midwestern, Ozark. Have you started to construct like your own space, your own invented town, do you think, like as you've moved through your work?
Yeah, I do think of it as my own town. I made three short animations that are all called Holmes, Missouri. And there's no Holmes, Missouri, or like, not that I know of. I was living in a town called Holmes in New York in the Hudson Valley after we moved out of Brooklyn. And I was thinking, okay, this place bears some resemblance to where I'm from, or where I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City, but I would go every summer to my grandma's house in the Ozarks. It was kind of my favorite place in the world. We didn't travel a lot, so I didn't have a lot of context, but it was amazing. There was a lake. My grandma was there, and so I saw that Holmes, New York had a kind of resemblance to that in a way. And so I thought, well, look, what if I take where I'm living now and I combine it with my past experience and I make this new place? Because I'm always looking at what's going on around me. And it was, in a way, a relief to move out of the city because the place where I was living suddenly looked much more like the work I wanted to make. In Ithaca is even more so the case. We're on a lake. We're further away from the center of the art world in the US and all of that. So Holmes is where I imagine all this stuff happening. And I don't necessarily have to put that in the title of everything, but it's just a helpful construct for me. And it means that it's okay when I draw a face and it looks like a face I've drawn before, because then I start to recognize the populace of this small town. And in the new animation I'm working on, there's a long tracking shot that I'm developing. It's a very long stretched out painting so I can move the camera along it. And it's the whole of the small main street. So I'm kind of starting to, and I'm actually doing a large painting of a homecoming parade right now that's walking down that main street. So I'm just, I'm thinking of the town as an extension of the characters. And yeah, it's very much alive in my imagination.
Yeah, it feels like you have constructed like this entire universe, like the characters that live there, where they live, where they go to school, where they work, like all of these types of things. Could you see maybe 10, 15 years down the road, creating maybe an actual like film? I'm kind of picturing David Lynchy type movie potentially. Is that something you'd ever be interested in? Is like creating a film with people and like working with the light and everything? Or have you thought about that?
You mean like a live action film?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't because I'm too shy. But and I and I'm impatient, which doesn't sound it. I know someone who does animation probably doesn't sound impatient, but my original impetus behind the three Holmes animations I did was that it would be like a soap opera, and I could just keep making Holmes. I'd make, they would just be unnumbered episodes of an ongoing uh, project or show. And I tried to come up. They're all in black and white paint. I thought it would just be this. I would use simple means. They're all animated on very small surfaces, about 7 by 11 inches, and I could animate a whole one. And once I had the paintings initially made, I could animate it in a few weeks because it was a very simplified animation language. But then I got interested in other things. But the initial impetus was like, oh, it'll be like Twin Peaks.
Yeah, that's
David Lynch wanted that show to go on forever. He didn't want to ever tell you who killed Laura Palmer. I don't know that he even knew at the start of it.
oh, I watched Twin Peaks when I was pregnant with my first kid. Like, that's all I watched. I was living in Boston. There was 9 feet of snow. I was watching Twin Peaks out like outside of Boston. It was a whole mood. So I
Yeah,
love that.
definitely.
Um, so you know, you know, I think are first and foremost like this painter. You love material. You have such incredible drawings. Has anybody ever come to you with your animations and been like, why don't you put them through a computer program instead of like painting them? Or is that like something you've ever thought of for a split second? Or how do you kind of feel about that?
Yeah, I know how to do some of those things. I think mostly it's just that I don't enjoy working on the computer very well. I like the editing software because it has become very intuitive to me, and the opposite is uh, it's just impossible, but or extremely difficult. So usually, if I give a talk at a school, there'll be students who will say like, you could do this and this or this. Um, but I think part of what every time I experiment with some new technology, and I've tried even things that aren't necessarily computer based, but I've made models for animations, more three-dimensional things. And when I do shoot test footage, it just looks like somebody else's work. It's not that it looks necessarily bad. It's just part of what I find interesting or I enjoy about my animations relationship to my paintings is that they're the same materials used in divergent ways. So that I think that's why you were talking before about rules. That's kind of become one of my rules is that the animations generally are two-dimensional. They're always handmade. Um, I don't try to make it extra. It's not harder for me. It's actually easier for me to do that because I've made thousands of. I mean, if you count the animation, I've made thousands of paintings. So I feel much more comfortable doing it.
Mm. Yeah, and you know, I love the connection that it keeps. And that it's slightly different than so many animations that you'll see in the world that are relying on different, programs. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's this beauty in knowing that it's this handmade painted piece that connects to the pieces on the wall. There's something also almost delicate to me in that. And maybe it's because we are so bombarded with computer programs and now AI and all these things. To know that you are actually making those just makes it feel just so human, and delicate because it was made by a human, I guess. So now I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk about a show that you curated, that is up right now, and then it's going to be going to the Armory. So can you please tell us about this exhibition that you have at the Fine Art Works Center in Provincetown? Yeah, tell us, have you curated before? Have you been curating a lot? Was this a new project or no?
So I have actually curated a few shows before, but this is a very different kind of project because with those, I had a lot of freedom. I could choose artists that based on whatever curatorial premise I was working with, and with this, I was invited to curate the benefit exhibition at the Fine Arts Work Center. They're doing it. They've started doing an annual benefit exhibition. Last year, Heidi Hahn curated the show, and the year before, Angela Dufresne curated the show. Amazing painters who both contributed works to the show that I've put together. So it's and then all of these, all three of us are former fellows at the Work Center, and all the artists that are in the show are former fellows. So I got to go through. The Work Center has been around for decades and decades. So I think the furthest back in the exhibition is Sam Mether, who was a fellow around 81, and all the way to Agnes Walden, who was a fellow this past year. So generations of artists who have been at this residency and been supported by the Work Center. So that was really different. And it also meant that the curatorial premise had to be very elastic to allow for, there's so many different kinds of artists who go to this residency and so many different generations. So I needed something that would allow I needed it to be very smudgy so I could let everybody in that I want. That, I was like, this is great stuff. I need to be able to include you. So I was thinking of the work center as a real intersectional kind of space. So that's where I ended up kind of writing the statement for that. And yeah, it's traveling from the gallery at the Work Center in Provincetown to the Armory show in 9 or 10 days. And all the work will be there. There's 19 artists in the show, really amazing artists, sculpture, painting, printmaking, works on paper, just really, really fabulous stuff. So I hope everybody goes and sees it.
That sounds incredible. And I love this idea of spanning so much and creating that structure, that elastic structure to kind of hold it together so that you can have all these different voices and put them into a show that still feels, cohesive and has ideas pushing behind it. And there's a great lineup. I'm sitting here looking and seeing who's in the exhibition right here. And James Everett Stanley, he was wonderful to have on here. Incredible painter, really love his work, Sam Messer, as you said.
Yeah, there's, amazing artists. Felicia Scavenge is in the show. My good friend Taylor Baldwin's in the show. People should look it up. Simonette Quamina. There's 19 people. I'd be happy to list all the names, but yeah, really, really great artists.
Excellent. Well, definitely we'll put all of the artists in the show notes so people can look them up. They can see the show at the Armory. And then I just wanted to touch on the show that you have coming up next year in April in LA. Can you tell us a little bit about that exhibition? And yeah, I know you're working on an animation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the paintings?
Yeah. So the show is at François Ghebaly Gallery in Los Angeles, and it currently slated to open in April. And I'm excited because I'm going to get to have a designated space to project the animation and still have loads of space for paintings. If I can pull it off, the large kind of centerpiece painting for the show is this homecoming parade, which I see as a cross section of the small town. And I've been kind of reflecting on ideas of home and hometowns. The animation is about a character named Dawn who is homeless. She lives in her car and she works at a CVS, and it's just a day in her life with variation on repeat. And I'm very interested in the kind of exploring the precariousness of a lot of people's working lives and present day experience and relationship to home, or the struggles with home. So I still have to make a lot of paintings, but those are some of the things that I feel like I know for sure.
Well, you have the space to make them now, so lots and lots of space. And I'm just curious for the homecoming painting. I can't remember if you said or not. How long is it going to be? How big is that painting going to be approximately?
Yeah, I didn't. Well, now you're going to hold me to it. So it's already started. I am working on it, but I reserve the right to give it a failing grade. But
I'll be out there with the measuring tape. No, it's all good. I get
it. It's a 12-foot painting, 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall. So it's essentially the maximum that I can get out of my building. The old studio, I couldn't fit it through the door, so it's a canvas that folds. And I bought the canvas a few years ago, and had just been hanging on to it, waiting until I had enough space that I could get it out the building. So yeah, the new studio has a loading dock, so hooray.
I love that. And I love this idea of a homecoming parade with movement and how this, just structure is moved with you and loading it and getting it around. That's fantastic. Well, congrats on that upcoming exhibition. You have so many wonderful things that are happening, between curation, your paintings, your animation, everything that's happening. So I just want to say thank you for taking some time to chat about all the things that are going on with you right now.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So Matt will be sharing all that information. And can you share really quickly what your website is that we can find you at?
Yeah, my website address is just mattbollinger.com. And I'm on Instagram, Matt L Bollinger. My middle initial is L. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.